Alright, so Avengers Infinity War was released like a week ago, and my mind's still pretty blown by everything I saw. All the fights, the effects, the deaths. Anyways, now that the movie's been out for a little while, I'd say it's time I got to work on a video highlighting every single Easter egg and reference in the movie, or at least all the ones I was able to find since the last time I saw the movie. And no, I'm not going to warn you guys about spoilers since you've had plenty of time to see the movie by this point, unless you want to count this as a spoiler warning, in which case, you've been warned. Anyways, the movie pretty much starts off with a couple different references right off the bat. As the Marvel Studios logo shows up on screen, it eventually highlights the I and O in the word studio, forming a number 10. Not only is this a reference to how the Marvel Cinematic Universe started 10 years ago with the first Iron Man movie, but it also references how the Star Wars franchise celebrated its first 10 years, as confirmed by Kevin Feige about a week ago.
We have a cool little logo that says Marvel Studios, the first 10 years. That was directly ripped off of my very positive memories of 1987 and Star Wars, the first 10 years.
Interesting. We also hear the Asgardians that managed to escape Ragnarok at the end of Thor Ragnarok, broadcasting an SOS to anybody nearby. Supposedly, the voice we hear in this message is Kenneth Branagh, the director of the first Thor movie. Personally, I think it'd be really cool if it turns out this really is him, because then that means he got to be involved with introducing the Asgardians in the MCU, as well as being involved with the near extinction level event they had to suffer through.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
After Thanos demands the Tesseract, Loki mentions how he's not Asgardian, which makes sense given the fact that we've seen in the first Thor movie that he's actually a frost giant, but he also states, "We have a Hulk," the same line Tony once said to him towards the end of the Avengers.
I have an army. We have a Hulk.
Speaking of, there's actually a ton of different references to earlier movies in the MCU, including Tony telling Bruce that the Avengers disbanded, a reference to the events of Civil War, Thor mentioning that his father died, that he killed his older sister after she cut his eye out, and that a dark elf killed his mom, referencing the last couple of Thor movies, Star-Lord following up on Thor's dead sister talk by recounting how he killed his own father, referencing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Drax at one point mentions that Peter had a dance-off that saved the universe, an obvious reference to the final battle against Ronan in the first Guardians movie, and that move Groot used against 3 of the Outriders, stabbing them in the stomach, was the same one he used in the first Guardians of the Galaxy when he took out a bunch of Ronan's goons aboard his ship. Skipping back to the beginning of the movie, when presenting the Tesseract to Thanos, Ebony Maw states, "My humble personage bows before your grandeur," the same thing Mephisto says to Thanos in issue number 1 of the Infinity Gauntlet comic. We get another reference to the same comic a little later on when we see Bruce Banner falling into the Sanctum and warning Doctor Strange and Wong that Thanos is coming, although in the comic it was actually the Silver Surfer who popped in for a visit. When we first get to see Tony and Pepper, Tony mentions having a dream that they had a child, while also spitballing the name Morgan for this potential future child. There actually is a Morgan Stark in the comics, although he's actually Tony's cousin and attacked him a couple times before being blown up in space. After arriving in the Sanctum, Tony's also berated for messing around near the Cauldron of the Cosmos.
Are you seriously leaning on the Cauldron of the Cosmos? Is that what it is?
The Cauldron's a mystical artifact Doctor Strange has had since the early days of the Defenders. No, not them. These guys. It's basically something that Strange uses to mostly view different realities and timelines, although he actually has used it for scrying, quick information, and meditation. After Ebony Maw and Cull Obsidian arrive on Earth looking for the Time Stone, Tony calls Maw Squidward, a reference to the SpongeBob character of the same name. Interestingly, in the French dub of the movie, Tony actually calls Maw Voldemort, referencing He Who Must Not Be Named from Harry Potter. Now that I'm actually looking at the both of them side by side, I can't actually unsee this. Anyways, while Iron Man, Wong, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man fight against the 2 members of the Black Order, we see Hulk and Banner have this like split face moment, similar to certain imagery from the comics and the Incredible Hulk TV show. Speaking of really old TV shows,
Jesus, Tony, how old is this guy?
As Spider-Man starts getting pulled up to the Black Order ship, he states that he's getting beamed up, a classic reference to Star Trek. Thankfully for him though, Tony quickly follows suit and after thinking he sent Spidey back to Earth, gets a call from Pepper, who demands that he get off the ship and come home immediately. During their conversation, we get to hear the track "This Is My Choice" from Captain America: The First Avenger. In that movie, we hear the song when Steve makes the decision to seemingly end his life by stopping the Red Skull's plane, although here, nobody dies. At least, not yet anyway. Moving on, after Bruce finds the flip phone Steve Rogers sent to Tony at the end of Civil War, we see him start to call Steve, and in doing so, we actually get to see Cap's phone number. It doesn't lead to anything, like the line's just disconnected, but the area code is for Atlanta, where a lot of Marvel movies are usually filmed. After this, we jump out into space and get reacquainted with the Guardians of the Galaxy, who by this point are flying a different type of ship than they usually did. James Gunn actually confirmed on Twitter not too long ago that the ship they're flying is named the Benatar, presumably named for singer Pat Benatar, much like the original original ship was named for actress Alyssa Milano. We also see Groot playing a video game, the handheld version of the 1981 classic Defender. Jumping back to Earth, during the attack by Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight, the music we hear when Captain America, Falcon, and Black Widow pop up is directly lifted from the first Avengers movie when they all teamed up to fight against Loki and the Chitauri. This is also the same scene when we get to see how a couple former members of the Avengers have changed over the years, with Steve Rogers embodying the spirit of his nomad identity from the comics, and Natasha's new blonde hair and eyebrows, weird, being a reference to the other famous Black Widow from the comics, Yelena Belova. Skipping back into space again, we get a flashback from Gamora, where we see Chitauri soldiers and Leviathans, both of which we saw in the first Avengers. After arriving on Nowhere, which we first saw in the first Guardians movie, there's a quick shot of Tobias from Arrested Development, decked out in full Blue Man Group makeup, in one of the Collector's tanks just behind Gamora. In the same scene, we also get a reference to the movie Snatch, one of the other movies on Benicio del Toro's resume, when we hear Thanos ask the Collector, "Where's the stone?" Funny enough, he even says it in a similar way to Del Toro's character from the movie.
Where is the stone?
When Thanos eventually uses the Reality Stone on Mantis and Drax, he turns them into like shredded ribbon or something and a bunch of blocks, similar to what he did against both Nebula and Eros in the comics. Star-Lord also calls Thanos Grimace, a reference to the classic McDonald's character. Side note, when he first appeared in the 1970s, Grimace was actually introduced as Evil Grimace. Turns out this reference actually fits a lot better than most of us would have guessed.
Wow. That's amazing.
Anyways, Thanos takes Peter out of the fight by using the Reality Stone to turn his blasters into bubbles. This probably isn't supposed to be a reference or anything, but at the same time, it could be a reference to Thanos' moveset in the video game Marvel vs. Capcom 2, where Thanos' attacks created bubbles for some weird reason. I'm still not entirely sure what all the point of that was, but whatever, bubbles in the movie count as a reference in my book. After Cap and the Secret Avengers return to Avengers HQ, we see writer Stephen McFeely playing one of the secretaries behind Thunderbolt Ross. Back in space, Spider-Man references aliens when coming up with his plan to defeat Ebony Maw, later referencing the franchise again when he begs Mantis not to lay eggs in him, like Xenomorphs love to do. We can even also hear the classic Wilhelm scream as Maw gets sucked out into space. Skipping over to the Nidavellir crew, Rocket gives Thor a new prosthetic eye, saying that he took it from a guy on Contraxia, a planet we previously saw back in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. When they finally get to Nidavellir, the Dwarf King Eitri, played by a ginormous Peter Dinklage, reveals that the new axe Thor is going to be forging is called Stormbreaker. On top of looking a lot like the ultimate version of Mjolnir, the new MCU axe shares a name with a hammer used by the horse-headed Thor himself, Beta Ray Bill, an awesome character who still hasn't physically shown up in the MCU yet. Come on, Marvel, make it happen already! Anyways, around this time, we finally get to see where the Soul Stone's been hiding out all this time. It's on Vormir, a relatively obscure planet from Marvel's history. There's supposed to be like a bunch of lizard people living there, but I guess they all died or something. Whatever, that part's not important, or at least not as important as how the Red Skull is actually on Vormir, acting as a guardian / guide to the Soul Stone. Holy shit.
Holy shit.
He actually looks pretty good for a guy who probably had nothing to do but float around and wait for people to show up. Speaking of his looks, I'm pretty sure that cloak he's wearing while floating around is supposed to be a nod to the physical embodiment of Death, who doesn't actually appear in this movie, but is an important part of Thanos' story in the comics. And when the Red Skull greets both Thanos and Gamora, he refers to the Mad Titan as the son of Alars. Alars is the father of Thanos in the comics and was ruler of the Eternals, who are set to be introduced into the MCU with their own movie in the future. Neat. Back with the Titan crew, Tony calls Star-Lord Flash Gordon, a reference to the character of the same name, and also refers to Drax as Mr. Clean, a reference to Mr. Clean. Later on, when Thor arrives in Wakanda, his weapon is the first thing we see, quickly taking out a few enemies before going back to him, similar to when he first appears on Vanaheim in Thor: The Dark World. In the big fight on Titan, Spider-Man shoots a web right in Thanos' face, just like he does in the comic, and Doctor Strange also uses a variety of magical abilities during the fight, including creating illusions to make it look as though he multiplied into an army, and what looks like a more comic-accurate depiction of the Crimson Bands of Cyttorak. You might remember this name previously being attached to the metallic trap used to hold Caecilius in the Doctor Strange movie for some reason. Anyways, by the time the action shifts back to Earth and Thanos begins his final assault to get the Mind Stone, we see him rip through some bindings that Groot generated around him, similar to when he defeated the Gardener during the Thanos Quest limited series. And of course, I don't think I really need to explain that classic snap, lifted straight from the comics. We also get to see a Scarecrow wearing Thanos' armor in front of his hut just before the movie ends. That's a reference to the end of the Infinity Gauntlet comic, after Thanos was defeated and found peace in a simple life as a farmer. And finally, the post-credit scene features Nick Fury watching people disappearing and deciding to call Captain Marvel. I went into this in a bit more detail in one of my other videos, so you can check it out by clicking the link in the description down below. But anyways guys, that's all the Easter eggs and references I noticed in Avengers Infinity War. I'm sure I missed some of them though, so if you noticed any that I didn't mention here, then go ahead and let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I will see you all next time. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, then go ahead and click that like button, and if you're new, maybe consider clicking that subscribe button too. I've also got links to my Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, and Patreon in the description. You should probably check those out too. And if you want to see more of my content, then you can click the link to my last video. It's right there in the middle of your screen. Alright, and I will see you all next time.